From online scams and digital fraud to cyber-enabled organized crime, the courtroom is no longer just a physical space. It's increasingly digital. Yet while criminals evolve quickly, the justice system is often forced to play catch-up. This week, South African judges and magistrates underwent Commonwealth-led training aimed at strengthening how courts understand cybercrime, handle electronic evidence and deliver justice in an age where a hard drive or a cell phone can decide the outcome of a case. So how prepared is our judiciary to deal with complex cybercrime cases? What does this kind of training mean for victims, for fair trials, and for public confidence in our courtrooms? To unpack this, we're joined by Mbekezeli Benjamin from Judges Matter. Mbekezeli, there are two conversations here. There's one about understanding digital instruments, the cyberspace, cybercrime, and cyber activity for the purposes of adjudicating a case. And then there's the use of digital assets, cyber instruments, for the purposes of the administration of justice. And I want to separate them and start maybe with the administration of justice first. How well do we fare in terms of that?
Good afternoon, Oliver, and good afternoon to the viewers. Look, we are not doing as well as we could have been. Only in the last couple of months has the court online system been rolled out to all the provinces and most of the high courts in the country. For a very long time, only Gauteng provided court online services. And so we are still quite far back. And even if you look on the continent, Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria in certain parts is far ahead of South Africa when it comes to the use of court online systems. And so we do have to do a bit of catch up when it comes to that.
What does that mean? Typically, if you're a litigator and you have to submit evidence, you have to submit heads, you have to submit your affidavit and other supporting documents, do you have to do so physically to the court or do you do so electronically?
Well, in most courts right now, we are moving towards filing online. Like I said, in Gauteng, that has been the case since COVID, actually. The reason why Gauteng was able to avoid having backlogs during COVID was because you could file court documents online. The whole case could be heard virtually. And so that is where we want to be. So in the end, there are two parts to this. The first one is just the filing system, which is called case lines, and then the electronic evidence management system. That one is the full court online package, and it is meant that at some point when this is fully rolled out, whether you are in Mthatha or you're in Thohoyandou or in Mbombela, you should be able to file a court document anywhere in the world, and you should be able to submit evidence anywhere in the world. And it should be an option whether you want the case to be heard physically in a courtroom or you want it to be heard virtually. That is where we are working towards, and that is the intention behind the court online system that is being rolled out by the Office of the Chief Justice.
Wait, so if a case is heard virtually, is it at the discretion of the judge or is it at a request of one of the parties?
Well, look, each province currently has its own methodologies. Each province has developed its own practice directive that determines which cases are heard online and which cases are heard virtually. For example, for many, many years, from COVID up until I think 2024, most of the cases that dealt with paper cases, so motions and applications in Johannesburg were dealt with virtually. The judges could issue a directive to be heard physically, but for the most part, you could be heard virtually. But unfortunately, that did cause some complications. So most cases are now heard physically, except for cases like appeals and the like that are heard virtually by default, and then only in sort of exceptional cases will they be heard in person. But I think at the moment, it is still really up to the discretion of individual judges in certain provinces, and then each province has its own practice directive to determine how the virtual system is utilized.
Yeah. Where are the specific gaps in the administration of justice in using cyber instrument and digital tools in courtrooms? You mentioned, for instance, evidence management, right? Where are the specific gaps and how do we catch up?
Well, look, I think there are still like basic problems that we still have in our system. I mean, the judiciary is not funded well. And so some of the problems, the teething problems that should have been long addressed are still a major problem. We should have almost universal Wi-Fi in all high courts currently, but that is not the case. Even in the most urban of courts, you still have an unreliable Wi-Fi service. Emails are still a challenge. It's not unusual sometimes to get court officials asking you to use Gmail instead of using the normal mailbox that should be used by the judiciary. And so that is just the basics, and those kinds of basics, basic problems rather, are caused by funding and budget concerns. But like I said, the idea is that ultimately you should be able to implement the evidence management system, the court online system, so that you have wall-to-wall coverage of the administration of justice done electronically. And that is also to safeguard the big problem that we have, where you'll find case files missing, you'll find documents missing, and that causes postponements. And so to try and eliminate those kinds of problems, and also fraud and corruption, as we've heard in the last year, the intention is to implement the court online system fully across the country.
Yeah. Now let's talk about understanding the cyberspace for the purposes of adjudicating complex cyber fraud cases, for instance. A lot of this is new to a lot of judges. Many of them would be dealing with it for the first time, or with not great experience, and often rely on experts to come in and help them understand those complexities, often having to do their own additional research to just understand, for instance, say, phishing. That is a common cyber fraud crime that takes place in South Africa. Do we know from the experience of judges whether or not they fare well in adjudicating those complexities?
Well, look, like you said, our judges are a mixed crop. There are some people who are in their late 60s to almost 70. Others are quite young, and others would have engaged with the technology for many, many years. Others are still new to the technology. And so it is a mixed bag. But I think overall, we are not doing too badly as a country, as a justice system, in terms of addressing issues of cybercrime and technologies in the digital space. I mean, when you mention phishing, one of the cases and the jurisprudence in South Africa is quite ahead of most countries. We have been able to develop a level of jurisprudence around phishing, which is called email tampering. There's legal principles that have been developed around that. Even when it comes to AI, I mean, there have been cases in the last year even, I think 2 cases, one from the Pietermaritzburg High Court, one was from Gauteng, that dealt with the use of AI in a legal context. And there, the court was very easily able to identify that a lawyer, a legal practitioner, had used AI in generating some of the arguments, because the court was able to identify that certain of the references were non-existent. So the AI was hallucinating. And so we are starting to develop legal principles around that. And so there is movement, but of course there can never be enough training that is provided in order for us as a country to be up to speed with other jurisdictions when it comes to legal principles in the digital space and how we regulate technology generally.
Now, this was an initiative led by the Commonwealth. But what should the Office of the Chief Justice, or perhaps even the Department of Justice, be doing in upskilling judges in understanding emerging technologies, nascent technologies that come with its own complexities? I mean, using ChatGPT to generate arguments and half of those are false because they just don't exist is one thing. But appearing before a judge and presenting deep-faked evidence that looks very, very real of a party perhaps supposedly saying or doing something, I can imagine an instance where a judge might look at it and quite believe it. And so, like you say, still a long way to go. But what is it that the Office of the Chief Justice is doing and should be doing to close that skills gap?
Well, in fact, the lead institution when it comes to judicial training on technology and other related issues is the South African Judicial Education Institute. And there have been courses that have been provided to judges and magistrates on issues like cybercrime, on issues like digital evidence, on issues like the use of technology when it comes to specific areas. For example, intellectual property, when you speak about deep fakes and AI-generated content. Those courses have been ongoing, and some of them are judge-led. So judges within the judiciary in South Africa are providing peer training to their fellows in order for them to be up to speed with the latest technologies, and especially the interface between technology and the law. Because one of the complexities with many of these technologies is that there is no regulations, there is no law that has been passed or developed by Parliament.
Yeah.
And so courts have to fill the gap in order to address some of the new challenges that are coming up.
Yeah. Mbekezeli, it's a pleasure to speak to you as always. Really do appreciate it. Mbekezeli Benjamin is with Judges Matter.